We're recording. If you hear squeals in the background, that's my son. He's pretty vocal, which is great. Just curious to see where it goes. And I'm really excited for this conversation. It emerged fairly organically, admittedly out of some of my own challenges that I was bumping up against in my house. And also something that I just noticed was being shared by several of my students and clients about the option of staying in our own experience in times of high stress. And so collectively, we're gathered in this moment in real time at the time of this recording of this unprecedented global situation. I'm hesitant to use some of the more familiar words that are being used associated with coronavirus, but it is certainly an opportunity, as I believe all of these situations are, but it is unprecedented for lots of reasons. You know, there hasn't really been a need for nationwide quarantine in any of our lifetimes. Even my parents, maybe people who are in their 90s. I'm not remembering when the last kind of quarantine was, but what I think is useful for us all to draw on as we gather together to do some focused introspection, and the point of this introspective work is to enhance our capacity to connect with one another, is that these are opportunities for us globally to really examine where our protocols aren't working. They aren't actually upholding our wellness. And it's necessary to do this kind of introspective work regularly, all the time, which is why in Ayurveda there's seasonal cleanses recommended. It's a time to kind of reevaluate the pattern that you've been in for a time and recognize, does this still serve me? Is this still what I need to feel well and connected? So I'm speaking a little bit to the immediate reality and relationship between us and the people in our household, because in many places it's like shelter in place. I've been through that with natural disasters, with a hurricane, but there also is this larger sense of how are we connecting, and is that effective? Is it useful? Is it nourishing? So these are some of the things that I'm going to be focusing on: nourishment, connection, and movement. There are several practices that we're going to be doing in this time together. We'll see how long it takes, but it won't be more than an hour. And before we get into any of that, I just want to give you a reminder / opportunity to look around your space and acknowledge that I am going to be inviting some movement, some somatic, meaning body-based tracking and experiencing on your part. So if you want to close a door, if you want to open a door, if you'd like to open a window, so there's some sense of availability for you, either availability to go in or availability to move out. If the inner landscape is actually feeling very congested, it might be super helpful for you to open a window, open the curtains. And I'll just give you a moment to do that. And this is our first practice. Take a moment to acknowledge for yourself the experience internally of the immediate surroundings. because at every moment we are responding to subtle signals and not so subtle signals. The not so subtle signals, most of us are aware of. The subtle signals are kind of what we've conditioned, or the not so subtle signals tend to be so loud, so big. Each of us, every single one of us, has built up a certain amount of armor against these outer influences and stimuli, so that the subtle aspects of our surroundings we're just sort of totally numb to. So I'm noticing right now, I really love my workspace, my office space. I get a lot of good light in here, but it's never hot. It's never like glaring heat. My neighbor has a really beautiful bougainvillea bush, those really deep magenta leaves. They're actually leaves. So I'm enjoying that. I'm feeling a little uncomfortable in my seat, so I'm going to adjust. Okay. Now, being sort of sequestered, some of you may be having the experience of being stuck in a place. Some of you may be really enjoying it. And still, there's a sense of really getting clear on tracking our ability to connect to the reality of the moment. Hi there. The reality of the moment is changing all the time. But what we can start to cultivate is an awareness of our own adaptability, or kind of deeply entrenched programming about how we respond to our outer environment. Now, that requires being deeply connected to our inner environment, and our inner environment is actually our physical body, right? So there's lots going on in the physical body, but I'm just going to keep that as sort of like the general reference point. I'm going to share a bit from a book today that I really love that has inspired most of my work, and it's called The Human Ground by Stanley Kellerman. Stanley Kellerman is an unbelievable somatic researcher, educator, teacher, trainer who has passed, but his work lives on in perpetuity through his writing and some videos. And so he refers to the physical body as the human ground, quite literally the earth of our being, and our capacity to grow depends on the quality of our earth. So if we're not connected to the earth, hello, the human race, we tend to behave and operate in ways that are antagonistic to sustainable life, that are antagonistic to flourishing, to growth and biodiversity and pleasure, right? When you look at a flourishing garden, or you have the opportunity to go to a beautiful wild landscape, I'm putting this out there as I'm sure you experience this, which might not be what you experience, but to me, it just evokes pleasure. Like I am witnessing pleasure through this wild, uninhibited growth that is on a biological level so intelligent, and there's deep communication happening. If you haven't already seen Paul Stamets' wonderful documentary called Fantastic Fungi, I highly recommend it. And it is a gorgeous expression of our undeniable interconnectedness. And we're experiencing it now in the world. I think what, again, that gross level experience or input is negative. It's scary, right? We're sort of unsure at this time if we're supposed to be afraid of one another. And we are unaccustomed to honoring and acknowledging the ways that we are deeply connected, and without it being based on, being physically together. Just the way that we operate in the world is connected. So I'm going to share on that specifically, again, from Stanley Kellerman's book. Let me just find the page. I've got 3 pages I want to share from, and I want to make sure I give you all the goodness. Okay, I think it's the first one, actually. Okay, he says, the natural consequence of closeness is the desire for distance, just as distance craves closeness. Contact is pulsatory. It contracts and expands. Having physical and psychological contact available gives us the option to form our own pattern of privacy instead of being driven to a person. So I feel as though this really speaks to several things. I'm going to say the larger point first. A lot of our contact with one another is not a choice. We're sort of forced into connection through the internet, right? I mean, everyone I know sort of would agree that like there's no way to have a business or work and not be online, not be on social media. There is this forced connection through that medium. There is also the fact, wonderfully so, we go out and we interact with one another as we get to work, as we go to the grocery store. But what I'm saying is, it's not so much a choice, or we think it's not a choice. And it is natural for us to want and need distance also. But these sort of deeply entrenched patterns of connecting drive a sort of subconscious way of disconnecting and distancing. And I feel as though this time where we're being forced to distance is a great opportunity to figure out the new ways that we would like to connect, rather than this sort of knee-jerk response of like, oh, I'm just gonna like scroll on Instagram all day long to feel connected, because that has been a way of connecting. But it's not the way or the best way or a very effective way, is it? We're sort of coming to that awareness of like, oh, fuck, this is really, it's not the kind of connection that I want. At least that's my experience. And feel free to type into the chat about your own experience right now. Now, this is, we're going deep, we're going there. And those of you who work with me, you know that that's just how I roll. So Stanley Kellerman, speaking to the human ground, our body, and this is an Ayurvedic concept as well, and likely in Chinese medicine and other indigenous forms of medicine, this is part of the worldview. Our human ground being our body, and how we learn to connect and distance in ways that are conducive to sustainable life and adaptability and biodiversity, aka joy and abundance, is determined by our family. Fuck. Okay. Our family determines how we find our ground, how we form our territory. If we do not have plenty of touching and holding, we may never be sure of ourselves emotionally, of the ground we stand on, since we cannot trust others to hold us. It's been my experience, as well as others, that people who are not held enough have a fear of falling and hold themselves stiffly away from earth. Those who feel shame for their sexuality and dislike for their bodily responses never really hold their ground with others. I could read a lot more, but I'm just going to leave that and take a breath and recognize how your own human ground resonates with that. All of our understanding of the world is physical. And we associate words, we experience what we call emotions based on these physical patterns of movement, right? So think of that. Contact is pulsatory. It contracts and it expands. Your breath, your actual physical expression of life force is this ever-present pulse. And we know, I know every single one of you who's here right now, and those of you listening, understand that we develop stress patterns, trauma patterns that are physicalized, a freeze, a need to constantly move and fix and change, an aggression. And those are muscular. Those are breath patterns. Those are vocal patterns. They're in our physical body. So consider for yourself, and also come back to that first practice. And if you came in a little later, orienting to the physical reality that you're in right now, and where there is a resource for you to feel like you've got some capacity to distance if the closeness feels like too much. I have distance through this beautiful window and view of my neighbor's bougainvillea plant. And it allows me to take a deep breath and remember that in this moment I'm safe and I'm right here. I'm not in that first memory that pops to mind about my family and what I learned about what I'm allowed to express or say or do or feel. Right? So we're just pulsing a little bit back and forth. But what do you have a sense of in this moment as the primary imprint from your family as an ecosystem, and how that impacted you relating to your human ground? And the early experiences, those earliest imprints, they imprint with such ferocity because we don't have any mental capacity to distance, right? Our survival depends on not distancing and finding whatever means necessary to stay close. So that might not be affectionate, it might not feel close, but it's a way of altering our behavior, maybe whatever it is. I don't need to list the options. You already know your way of staying close. And if you don't, just consider what's showing up in your intimate relationships right now. In this time of imposed distancing, or maybe imposed closeness with people in your household, what's showing up? Feel free to type something into the chat if you want to share, if you want to name it. You also don't have to. If you're listening, if it feels good to write it down or say it out loud. If you're with a partner, you could name it to each other. And then, of course, take a deep breath, both of you, and look out the window. I see some hands going towards keyboards, so I'm going to pause and wait to see what comes through. I love the term pulsatory, yeah. And especially as someone who does body work, it's a cool thing to, and that word, pulsatory, it's beautiful. And as someone who lives alone and whose intimate relationships are distanced physically, I'm trying to find ways to nourish myself physically in this setting, totally. What you speak to with that is so important, and what we'll move into next. When we have physical distance from those with whom we do feel intimate, it's an opportunity to, you know, this larger theme of reparenting ourselves and give ourselves the physical touch and nourishment we are longing for. It's such an important part of any intimate relationship. Who are you outside of that relationship? And do you stay you in the relationship? There's a researcher, I'm not sure if he's still alive, Ashley Montague, who wrote about touch a lot. That was his focus of research. And he says, touching completes the nervous system. Stanley Kellerman then just says, I say touching completes the feeling process. We never outgrow our need for touching and holding. Our skin is an extension of our feelings. The surface of our body teaches our brain about the world. The skin, of course, we know it's an organ, it's a sense organ, and it is giving your brain information. So just imagine that, the absence or lack of touch and what that's feeding your brain about what is happening and how the body needs to respond. You all know the famous study, it's sort of intense, I think, but like an experiment essentially done in the early part of the last century with orphans. And orphans who were not held didn't survive the first year or 2 years of life. And this doesn't go away. This need for contact doesn't go away. Rather, it's that we become more capable of seeking it out ourselves. However, those early imprints of is touch safe, is touch welcome, what do I need to do to earn affection? Do I need too much? You know, what the messages are that our really mushy brain and nervous system are internalizing, that's how we then go about getting our needs met as adults. And Dr. Claudia Welch, such a famous, beautiful, wonderful Ayurvedic teacher and doctor of Chinese medicine, she speaks to our early adolescence as the time when we're the most mushy and impressionable. So we're learning about ourselves from our peers, you know, like, holy hell, how terrible is that? We're learning about how to be from like tweens, other tweens, right? And at that time, things sort of get solidified. Like we're really trying to autonomize and define ourselves. And the only way to, or in her words, the best way to soften the concrete, so to speak, and change some of those early impressions is through oxytocin, which of course is the love hormone, which of course is produced through loving, safe, consensual touch. So we're going to go into a practice. First, I want to read this comment. So beautiful. I'm suddenly living in my childhood bedroom and helping take care of my niece and nephew while my brother is separated from his kids. Wow. What an opportunity. Like you are actually physically, literally in your childhood bedroom and dealing with your family. It makes me long for my own family and already lonely for when I will leave here in a few days. Wow. What a gift to feel nourished by the container that you find yourself in. And likely challenged by it too, right? We'll get to the grief in a moment. And again, I mean, it's perfect actually. I don't know if you can hear it, but the background soundtrack for me is my husband playing with my son and like squeals and all these crazy sounds, the reality of my life. Okay. So I've given you a lot of information, and I think about, you know, this sort of pulsatory quality of our feeling state and our our interrelatedness to one another. Whether we're aware of it or not, we're reaching out and we're pulling in. We're reaching out and we're pulling in constantly. To the degree that we allow ourselves to take in, we're being fed by the outside world. And to the degree that we sort of push ourselves away from the outside world or from one another, we're teaching ourselves constantly about whether or not it is safe. And it's really happening on this subconscious level. So what I'm inviting is an initial practice of working with our skin as an amazing organ that is both our boundary and our means of connecting. Wow. Like, this is our primary boundary, right? This is my clearest sense of where I am and where you are, right? So let's just take a few, probably minutes. We want to give a lot of spaciousness. As we go in, remember where your access point is, the window, the picture on your wall that reminds you you have the capacity to move away and come back. And with your non-dominant hand, the hand that you don't write with or do most of your activities with, just begin to gently touch the opposite forearm. Thank you, Kimberly Johnson, for teaching me this practice. And touch yourself, find the way to touch yourself that gives you the experience of containment, safety, and boundary. Feeling for, on the visceral level, meaning your guts, your breath, your nervous system response, the quality of touch that imparts a sense of safety. And again, you have an out. I don't really want to say that, but you do have an access point should you find that this elicits or brings up anything overwhelming. Opening your eyes can be what you need. Take your time with this, please. And it may feel good to just pause and kind of hold yourself. And then in whatever way feels really good to you, you can continue the touch of your own skin, this time allowing for the possibility that you start to use both hands and you might begin to engage touch with other parts of your body. So you do have privacy here, even those of you who are on video, just a matter of scooching yourself back if you find that it feels good to touch in a way that you don't want visible. Really invite that. And at the same time, holding a little bit of awareness to that quality of touch that imparted safety, and come back to that specifically at any time, in case there is, you find kind of a peaking experience in your emotional body. You're going to do this for about 1 more minute. At any point, you can look to your window, release your hands, do what you need to do. Find your stopping point, which may be hands still on body or hands resting alongside you or in your lap. Take a couple of breaths where you sigh out audibly on the exhale, and you might accompany that with a little shake, shimmy, or any other movement that feels good. I always like to shake my hands. If you need more movement, if you want to stand up and bounce up and down, sometimes that feels really good too. The practice of touch can engage so many layers of our being. Something I want to name is to engage touch in this way that is curious, and maybe you found yourself touching softly or in a way that you're not even used to feeling contact. Just to go off on a little bit of a tangent, like whether you have a self-touch practice like massage in the morning, abhyanga, there's sort of like a formula to that, so it can get a little bit unintentional. And even our masturbation practices, where it's like, well, this is how I know I'm going to get off, so it's just sort of like functional, perfunctory. I really like that word, rather than curious. And the more kind of curious quality of touch, I find in my body to be pretty soft. And this is the quality of touch for lymphatic massage. And in Ayurveda, the lymph is what they say holds grief. Lymph as water, as plasma, as kapha, earth and water element, is more of these, I can feel it in my heart right now, the kind of ditch of that is grief. You know, water, when it's real steady, forms a trough. So movement, whether it is just this kind of like gentle brushing, you know, think of where your lymph nodes are, jaw, face, armpits, inner thighs, just to create a little light brushing there. And maybe you use a dry brush or a loofah in your shower to get things moving. Stagnation, wherever there is stagnation, there is kind of an accumulation of weight. And I think the most heavy emotion is grief. And that's not an opinion, that's from Ayurveda, if you want a little more information on it. So there is, you know, with your own personal touch practice, there is a real effect, right? An opportunity to create some softening and movement of these more deeply entrenched patterns of the kinds of touch we're accustomed to. And then I'm moving us into a little bit of content related to Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent. Some of you may be familiar with her work. BettyMartin.org. She's got a ton of free education videos on her website. And she is one of, I mean, in every sex education training program, whether it's sexological body work or somatic sex educator, this is foundational work. So the Wheel of Consent, to put it just in an overly simplified way, there's 4 quadrants, 4 ways of being with touch. And I'll share the image. You can also Google it. It can get pretty complicated, but you can find some more simplified versions of this image. It's just imagine a circle divided into 4 quadrants, and I'll break it down as easily as I can. You can give. This is touch with regards to an other, right? So we're working with our own sense of touch. Now when it comes to touch with an other as a way of connecting, you can give for another person's pleasure, meaning make yourself available to touch another person for their pleasure in a way that they've asked for touch. If you're a massage therapist, this is part of your MO. You can also allow for their pleasure, meaning be touched in a way that gives the other pleasure. You can take for your pleasure, touching someone else for your pleasure, and you can receive for your pleasure, meaning receiving touch in a way that you've requested, in a way that you like to be touched. Now, I'm going to say those again in case you want to write them down. You can give, touch someone else for their pleasure. You can allow yourself to be touched for the other's pleasure. You can take, touch someone else for your pleasure. You can receive touch for your pleasure. Now, I just want you to consider from instinct, what is the ratio of giving for someone else's pleasure versus taking or receiving for your pleasure in your life? What are you most accustomed to? What is the ratio of obligation versus enjoyment? Definitely 90% giving, maybe 95. Definitely give more than any other. I feel out of balance as a massage therapist. Lots of giving, some receiving, for sure. For sure. Yeah, the ratios, it's more like in your mind, a sense of this, and something to just consider. There is something to be said for going back to family in our original container, our human ground. What is my source of value? My source of value in my family of origin, this is me, Stacy, speaking for myself, is making sure everybody else is happy. And how that plays out in my intimate relationships, pretty similar, right? And I think this is common, although I don't want to name this as like the way it is, but please give me your own feedback. For women, we tend to orient in this way of like, as long as you're happy, that's what counts. And I've even heard, recently a repetition of a pattern, like what we inherit from observing how our parents are in their body, in their intimate dynamic. I'm here for his pleasure. Or even not, if like a withholding of touch or contact, of sort of like, this is something you have to earn. Let's see if you have anything you want to say, comment on that. And remember, your window, your furry friend laying by you if you have something warm to snuggle or pet, that's helpful. My mom is 99% giver, and something I have tried to rebel against, but it's tough to break the habit. It's tough to break the habit when it is sort of this, I'm not going to be like you, when we just are. We just are like them. That belief system is part of how we express in the world. And that's a piece from Ayurveda, and a lot of Stanley Keleman's work, whether deliberately or not, I'm not sure, draws from this. The way that we are in the world is informed by our maternal and paternal lineage. as well as our experience of gestation, as well as the unique impulse of our individual soul to grow and learn in this lifetime, in this incarnation. So that part of you that is like, I don't want to do that, is 25% of 100%. There's a lot to work against, it usually feels like. So it's finding these softening agents, right? Softening our sense of distance, finding a way to be connected through compassion, right? Recognizing that you are carrying some part of her need to just be accepted in this lifetime, right? We figure out how to be in order to feel safe. And how can I then determine for myself, right? Like your role is to determine for yourself and commit to ways of being and interacting that give you that felt sense of safety so that you can operate in a different way rather than it just being sort of this mental distancing, I think is what I wanted to say about that. Does that make sense? I feel this collective experience is inviting me to receive in a way that I haven't allowed myself to do before, not just physically either. I wasn't taught in my family of origin to receive like this, to receive help from so many sources and without an expectation to return it. Yes. Yes. I mean, my God, to put it bluntly, like I am in a very privileged position. Income is not a challenge for my family right now, so I'm not speaking to it personally. But what I imagine, what you just spoke to, is, you know, part of this collective wave of shift and altering the way that we are in this world and on this planet together is that acknowledgement that I need help. And it's all of our responsibility to make sure that we're all okay. I've been completely homeless, literally, multiple times in my life. And were it not for someone saying, yes, of course you can stay here, I don't know where I'd be. But that required me saying, I need this. And so this is where we're going to kind of close our discussion today. Through this awareness of your own experience of your body, sensation, touch, some awareness of how consent works. I know this is a pretty brief overview. If you want to go deeper, you know where to find me. What is not being spoken and what is not being heard? So again, there's this dynamic happening globally and in our partnerships of, you know, whatever the disconnect is, there's two participants. What is actually coming out of your mouth? What is the other person interpreting or hearing? It's not always, you're just not hearing me. It's, what are you actually saying? What is actually coming out of your mouth about what you need? And allowing for your body to be that barometer for, okay, this is not a safe place to be asking for what I need. And if it's, you know, if we're talking about introducing something here that we haven't touched on specifically, but if you're talking about like feeling in a partnership or a marriage, like, oh, this is not actually a safe place for me to ask, that's a pretty big deal. And I also feel like that is likely coming up for people. We've just been entrenched in a pattern where, you know, I was able to write it out because, you know, tomorrow's Monday and I get to go to work and I don't really have to deal with you for a week or whatever. You know, I get to go out and I'm going to go to happy hour, or I'm going to go to my yoga class, or I'm going to have a measure of freedom in that distancing. But again, it's distancing that is not organic. It's distancing that is precipitated by a deeper dysfunction. So it is normal and natural for us as organisms to connect, to find closeness, and distance ourselves. What we're learning right now is what part of that process is functional and what part is dysfunctional. Where do we distance because the closeness is unsafe rather than distancing just because I am an autonomous being and it's healthy? We're going to close with actually a vocal practice. Ah. Again, thank you, Kimberly Johnson. Those of you who are familiar with somatic experiencing or Kim's work, Activate Your Inner Jaguar. She's got a book that she's finishing right now. It's, in her words, the feminist version of The Body Keeps the Score. Badass. Yeah. So, yay! She's a dear teacher of mine and an amazing educator. So this practice comes from somatic experiencing, which is one of her modalities that she works with. And I'm going to bring in a little bit of awareness of subtle body anatomy. The first distinction, differentiation of that like globular mass of cells that is you, that first distinction is what's called the food tube, the mouth to anus opening. This is our most primitive tissue structure. It's all mucosal tissue, right? Your throat, your mouth, your throat, your digestive organs, that inner skin, and then the genitals, basically an elimination system. This tissue is very responsive to touch. So I'm not telling you to do or not do anything with your mouth and your butthole, but I am telling you, I am inviting some awareness that one way of engaging touch is through vibration, which you can create for yourself through sound. So the sound that we're going to make is VOO, and we're going to do this several times with movement. First, we're just going to start with the VOO, and it's like sounding an Om, right? Just sustained sound out of your mouth. Okay, so we'll take a collective breath and simply sigh it out. And then all together, inhale. Do that one more time. And then I invite you, we'll do it 2 times with just a very small amount of internal movement. So if you can imagine this central channel, inner structure from your mouth all the way to the root of your body. It could be your spine if that's easier for you to connect to. Or if you can imagine this cylindrical tube, and as you sound VOO, again, we'll do it twice, just move, kind of sway along the central channel, and as a way of getting the vibration, the sound all the way down from top to bottom. Okay, so less projection of your sound and vibration and more kind of wiggling around to draw it down all the way to your tailbone. All right, inhale. Keep practicing. You may not need a lot of movement. You're feeling for the areas along the central channel that maybe aren't as receptive and bringing some movement there, external physical movement. When you're done with that second sounding, I'm going to do 2 more things this next round, sounding VOO twice. As you sound it, you're going to open and close your mouth. So it will look like this, just as an example. Voo, ow, ow, ow. So your mouth is open the whole time, but you're sort of expanding that pulsatory movement in your mouth, okay? As you're ready, take a breath. And then find the sound and the movement. Voo, ow, 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 ow. And again. Voo, ow, ow, ow. Pause with your eyes open, just letting your breath recalibrate to something like neutral. Maybe find your window or your wall hanging that comforts you. Connect to your immediate surroundings and notice, is there tingling? Is there emotion? Any sense of charge in your nervous system or relaxation? All of it's information. It's for you to know. Maybe some information about if it's more comfortable for you to speak versus keep quiet. So this last round of the VU practice, yeah, and some of you are doing it naturally. Feel free to shimmy, shake, bounce up and down. Stick out your tongue, do a lion's breath. I'm going to invite the possibility of a posture going along with VU. So I'm not going to do it because then you won't be able to see me, which is fine, but I'm going to stay here. I'm going to do VU 2 times. The possibility of being on hands and knees, which is 2 things. It's a very vulnerable position, can be. It can be evocative of vulnerability. It is also a little bit more mammalian, right? Like our quadruped ancestors. So tune into whether or not that would be helpful. You might just want to stand and do VU. If you want to stay seated as you are, you're going to do the same. Everybody's going to do the mouth pulsing. But if you're not doing a posture, the next layer will be to open your eyes as you open your mouth, and kind of neutral eyes and mouth is the pulse. You might even just kind of sway your body like a seated cow-cat, okay? 1 breath, just to clear, maybe a lion's breath. Remember, all of these are invitations. If there's an overwhelming amount of charge, rest. 2 rounds of VU on your own breath capacity and length. VU, ow, 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 ow. Second round on your own. And then a few breaths resting. Change your posture to something more grounded if that's what you feel like you need. Move, shake it out if that's what you feel like you need to recalibrate to something like neutral. And you might notice, a lot of energy that feels great. You might notice a lot of energy that is a bit much. So find a resource for yourself in your physical space, in your physical posture. And if you want to type in the chat anything about your experience with that, please do. If you just need to not do anything right now, that's great, do that. Dog joined, yes. Baby mammalian, they love it. Tingling in my tongue, feeling more calm. Great. Giving some, um, it's a great practice with this understanding of kind of the primitive tissue structure, the relationship between our jaw and our pelvis, our throat and tongue tissue, and our genital tissue. Um, there are lots of ways in. There are lots of ways to address challenging experiences. There are lots of ways to adjust and address stagnant patterns. Acknowledging what is present and finding a way to gently move. Remember the lymph massage? It's curious touch. It's quite gentle. There's no need to go in with elbows and fists unless that's your deal. But I encourage you, as someone who always asks massage therapists to use their elbows and fists, the most significant change and shift I've had in my tissue and my nervous system, right? They're inextricably connected, were the gentlest massages. Sort of the sweetest, I'll say. So I'm really grateful for your time and participation in this. Those of you who were able to be here live, thank you. Myofascial release is my jam. Hell yeah. It's important to close with intention, to acknowledge our experience and give it the opportunity to complete. In our collective understanding of the nervous system, trauma is when there hasn't been an opportunity to complete an experience. There was no closure. So we close, not because this was trauma, but because we certainly did move some energy and bring some stuff up. And so I'm going to offer a mantra to close. You're welcome to listen unless you already know it. It's called the Param Jyoti mantra, and it is the mantra to the supreme light, the light of our being, the light of our soul, our intrinsic wisdom and capacity to move through this life in a way that is healing and medicinal. Crossing over, it's an invocation to the Hamsa, which is a swan who glides across beautifully, gracefully the river of duality in our mind, a sense of it should be this way or that way. There is only the way that will be healing and medicinal to your soul, and that is what you're in this body to accomplish. It's beautiful. So I'll speak it, and then I'll chant it 3 times. Om Hrim Hamsaha Soham Swaha. 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 Om. In honor of each of you, in honor of your practice, namaste, thank you. I look forward to connecting with you in the next few days. Please reach out to me if you'd like to share anything, ask any questions, and certainly to just have some witnessing for your experience with this. Take good care.